Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. An interesting aspect related to the criminal psychology of this case is the idea that the killer was trying to do something impressive. That's fairly unique in true crime. More often we see crimes that are directed against a victim, not towards some anonymous audience. More often crimes are specific, not symbolic. We'll come back to the symbolic nature of this case, but first let's deal with the potential blood evidence that was recovered at Kohberger's apartment in Pullman. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, I'll be doing a live just dealing with some of the places I've passed that have a relevance to true crime while I've been in California. I'm in California right now, leaving for, Arizona tomorrow. And so I'll just be sort of recapping some of the latest events, not only in true crime, but related to my journey through sort of the true crime landscape, if you will. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So we already know that these stains were tested and basically seemed indicative of blood evidence. What we can safely assume through the word preliminary is that the evidence has been altered or degraded in some way, which in turn raises the question, will this evidence have any probative value, say, during the upcoming trial, ultimately? Probative basically means affording proof or evidence. I think the probative value will likely be more circumstantial and contextual than a smoking gun of DNA evidence. So, for example, if the blood is that of one of the victims, I doubt whether that can or will be demonstrated, especially if proving the substance was blood was already a hurdle in the first place. I do think the fact that the evidence was found on an uncased pillow, so where it was found, also on the pillow but under the pillowcase, I think that's interesting. In the Chris Watts case, we know that Watts used a pillow cover to wipe up possible fecal stains. In this case, it may have been something similar, or simply that an exhausted murderer, so when I say something similar, using a pillowcase to wipe something, or simply that an exhausted murderer, physically and psychologically spent, but also just dead tired from being up all night, needed to grab a pillow as soon as possible after he entered his apartment. Probably showered, but perhaps he missed a spot, so on the back of his head. Perhaps a blood-soaked sock or a sleeve cast off before the shower led to a transfer. It's interesting if this is actionable evidence that a criminology student could have or perhaps would have allowed something this inculpatory to be still found in his possession. And we do know that when the police entered his apartment, they found that his bedroom door was locked. Now, why would you do that? Why would you lock your bedroom door if you were the sole occupant? And perhaps it is anticipating a landlord coming into the area, and so why would you do that? It does suggest that Brian was being secretive about something, perhaps had guilty knowledge, of something. So the other question is, if the uncased pillow has evidence, where is the casing? What happened to the casing? Again, in the Chris Watts case, we know that some of the bedding was thrown in the trash can, and they did find evidence on that. In terms of the mattress cover also had some sort of stain on it. It would make complete sense that after a knife-type crime like this, one would expect blood traces in the killer's living space, either in the carpets or any other absorbent fabrics. And given the time this crime was committed, not only close to 4 a.m., but the fact that the killer had apparently sort of circled, he had been sort of doing the rounds all hours, including returning to the scene after the incident, one would expect his next port of call to be his bedroom and his bed. This is where law enforcement searched for evidence, and this is where apparently they found it. I would suggest that this evidence, which may be blood, will have similar significance to the hair found stuck to the duct tape of the 7-year-old victim in the Laurie Vallow case. It's not a smoking gun. It's just another piece of the mosaic that the prosecution will be putting together to build their case. It is, nevertheless, I would argue, quite a strong piece of evidence. That then brings us to symbolism. This crime appears to be symbolic in that the perpetrator wanted to shock and awe the quiet student town of Moscow. He wanted to prove something, say something, and he wanted to tear the fabric of the student community, and arguably he succeeded. If the perpetrator was still out there, now, if hypothetically it was still out there, and several months later still attending classes, I think one could argue that we were dealing with a perpetrator who needs to be seen as bold, and of course, in terms of himself, a shameless character.
Yeah. So I know laws vary state to state,
and
there is a law.
Bear in mind, a document has been also released that shows that the university authorities basically told Kohberger on December 30th that he would be arrested. He wasn't allowed, I think it's a trespassing order or something like that. He would not be allowed to return to campus. He simply, the permission to move across the campus or attend classes had kind of been revoked. But you can imagine if he had committed the crime, no one knew who he was, and he returned and was still attending classes. What do you think that sort of shows? Not only a shameless character, but something else. And if he could have done that and gotten away with that, I think it's the idea behind that is you're dealing with a really scary character, someone who can do something and then move amongst you, sort of slyly knowing what he's done, but you don't know what he's done. And so he kind of has one up on you. He's smarter than you. You're afraid. You don't know who it is or what's going on, but he does. Some of us are interested in true crime because we are fascinated with the depravity of the criminal mind. In the same way that psychopathy may horrify us, there's a part of us that's fascinated by the ability to do things with cold precision, unfettered by feelings and emotion. Is that who we're dealing with here? Far from it, in my opinion. This crime wasn't committed by someone who lacked emotion, but by someone who was driven by emotion. What this killer lacked was social cushioning. And over time, I believe he'd come unstuck from whatever social glue he'd been part of. And in my opinion, this was a kind of revenge on society for not accepting or liking or including him. In that sense, this crime is more akin to an indiscriminate crime with mass casualties than a targeted attack. Again, this is what makes this criminal and this crime quite unique. It's not really one or the other. It's a bit of both. It's not targeted, and yet it is. It's not personal, and yet it is. It's not a message to society, and yet partly that's precisely what it is. It's payback. But whose fault is it really when someone falls out of favor with society? Is it the individual's fault or society's fault or no one's fault? So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. You can leave a comment under this video. So I'm not going to take it further than that. I am going to be doing a live stream just dealing with some other issues in terms of BRYAN KOHBERGER, and then also my journey through California and just some thoughts along in terms of that. So look out for a live discussion later today. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.